Hello and welcome to Sarah and Paul Conversation. Today, Sarah and Paul explore the most famous quotes in English, where they came from, what they mean, and how native speakers use them today. Here we go.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Sarah and Paul Conversation. We are so glad you're here with us today.
Hello, everyone. And today's episode is one I've been looking forward to for a very long time. Because today we are talking about something that sits right at the intersection of language, history, and culture.
Famous quotes.
Famous quotes. And I want to start with a question. Why do certain phrases survive for hundreds of years, while entire books, speeches, even whole careers disappear without trace?
That's such a fascinating question. And I think the answer is that the greatest quotes do something very specific. They say something universally true in a way that feels completely surprising. You hear them and you think, I have always felt that, but I have never found the words for it.
They crystallize something. They take a feeling that lives in everyone and give it a shape. And that shape turns out to be so perfect that no one ever improves on it.
And from a language learning perspective, famous quotes are also incredibly useful because they are compressed, careful, beautifully structured English. They teach you rhythm, vocabulary, grammar all at once. And once you know them, you hear them everywhere, in films, in news articles, in conversations, in speeches.
Where do we start?
We start with Shakespeare, because if there is one source that has contributed more famous phrases to the English language than any other, it is William Shakespeare.
By a very long distance.
By a very long distance. And the most famous line of all is, of course, to be or not to be, that is the question, from Hamlet, written around 1600. And what is extraordinary about this line is that almost everyone knows it, even people who have never read or seen the play. It has become a shorthand for existential doubt, for any moment when you are weighing a difficult, fundamental choice.
Do I stay or do I leave? Do I speak or do I stay silent? Do I change my life or carry on as it is? To be or not to be has absorbed all of those dilemmas.
And people use it playfully in everyday English too. Should I have the cake or not? To eat or not to eat? That is the question. It's a structure people reach for whenever they want to dramatize a small decision with a little self-aware humor.
Another Shakespeare line that has completely entered the language is, all the world's a stage, from As You Like It. And the idea that life is a kind of performance, that we all play roles, is one of the most enduring metaphors in the English language. We still talk about people playing a role, being in the spotlight, making an exit.
The metaphor is alive even when people don't know its origin. And that is one of the most interesting things about famous quotes. They sometimes outlive the memory of where they came from. People use the language and the image without knowing it was Shakespeare.
Let's move from Shakespeare to the 20th century. Because some of the most powerful and widely remembered quotes in English come from political speeches. Moments when language was called upon to carry an enormous weight.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Franklin D. Roosevelt, 1933, the first inaugural address delivered during the Great Depression when millions of Americans had lost their jobs, their savings, their confidence in the future.
And what that line does is remarkable. It names the emotion, fear, and then immediately reclassifies it. Fear is not a response to the crisis, Roosevelt is saying. Fear is the crisis. It is the thing standing between the people and recovery. And naming it that precisely gave people something to resist, something to refuse.
In everyday English now, this quote is used whenever someone is trying to encourage another person past paralysis, past hesitation. You hear it before exams, before job interviews, before difficult conversations. It has become a way of saying the anticipation is worse than the reality.
And then the most important speech of the 20th century, in my view. I Have a Dream. Martin Luther King, 1963. Washington, D.C., over 250,000 people.
This is one of those speeches where even the structure, the repetition of I have a dream, is a masterclass in English rhetoric. Anaphora, it's called. Beginning successive sentences with the same phrase. And what it does is build an almost unbearable sense of accumulation. Each dream added to the last, each image expanding the vision.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. The phrase content of their character is so precise. Not their achievements, not their status, not their wealth. Their character. The moral core of who they are.
And I have a dream has entered the language as a template for expressing any deep hope for the future. You see it everywhere now in campaign slogans, in motivational writing, in personal essays. It has become the English language phrase for articulating a vision of something better.
Let's talk about a different kind of famous quote. The kind that sounds like wisdom and feels ancient, but turns out to have a surprisingly modern or contested origin.
Yes, misattributed quotes. This is a genuinely important phenomenon for English learners because if you use a quote and attribute it to the wrong person, you can look quite embarrassed.
The most famous example is probably "Be the change you wish to see in the world," almost universally attributed to Gandhi. Quoted everywhere, on posters, in motivational speeches, on social media. But historians of Gandhi's writings say he never said or wrote exactly this. The closest he came was something considerably longer and more philosophical. The crisp, poster-ready version appears to be a modern simplification.
Which doesn't make the sentiment less valuable, but it does raise an interesting question about what we do with ideas. We compress them, we make them portable, we trade precision for memorability.
Another one. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Attributed endlessly to Einstein. Not written by Einstein. Most likely coined by a 12-step recovery program in the 1980s. But it has such authority, such compressed logic, that people reach for Einstein's name to give it weight.
And there is something interesting here for language learners. The real Einstein quotes are actually far more interesting. Imagination is more important than knowledge. That one is genuinely his, from a 1929 interview, and it's a remarkable claim for a scientist, someone whose entire career was built on rigorous knowledge, to make. But his argument was that knowledge describes what is. Imagination reaches for what could be. Without imagination, knowledge has nowhere to go.
One of the things I love about famous quotes is how differently they can be interpreted depending on where you stand. Take Winston Churchill. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts.
That's one of those quotes that feels designed for the worst moment of someone's life, when everything has collapsed and they are wondering whether to get back up. Success is not final, so don't become complacent when things go well. Failure is not fatal, so don't surrender when they go badly. The only thing that defines you is what you do next.
And linguistically, the structure is beautiful. The repetition, the symmetry. Not final, not fatal. The alliteration, and then the pivot. It is the courage to continue that counts. The emphasis falls on continue, on counts. Both words beginning with C. It's almost musical.
Let's talk about two quotes that come from literature rather than speeches, because some of the most widely known phrases in English come not from real people, but from fictional ones.
It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities, 1859. Arguably the most famous opening sentence in the history of English literature.
And what makes it so extraordinary is the paradox. It doesn't begin by describing a world. It begins by describing a contradiction, the best and the worst occupying exactly the same moment. And anyone who has ever lived through a period of great upheaval, personal or historical, recognizes that immediately, the beauty and the horror existing side by side.
Today, people use the structure constantly. It was the best of jobs. It was the worst of jobs. It was the best of years. It was the worst of years. It has become a template for describing any experience of extreme ambivalence. And it's used with both real seriousness and great humor.
And then there's Elementary, My Dear Watson, attributed to Sherlock Holmes. Except Holmes never actually says this in any of Arthur Conan Doyle's original stories. The full phrase was assembled over time in stage adaptations and films, and yet it has become one of the most quoted lines in fiction. A perfect example of how a character can exceed the text they came from.
Let's end with two modern quotes that have shaped the way a generation thinks. Steve Jobs, Stanford Commencement Address, 2005. Stay hungry, stay foolish.
This is a quote that rewards careful attention because hungry and foolish are both words that could sound negative. Being hungry suggests a lack. Being foolish suggests poor judgment. But Jobs is reclaiming them entirely. Hungry means never becoming satisfied with what you know, never stopping your curiosity, never resting on what you've already achieved. And foolish, in this sense, means willing to take risks that others consider unreasonable. Willing to believe in something that the world hasn't confirmed yet.
It is a quote about the creative life, about refusing to become comfortable. And it has resonated so deeply because so many people feel the pull of safety, of settling, and need a reminder that the discomfort of growth is actually the point.
And finally, Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
This one always stops me, because it reorders what we think matters. We work so hard on what we say, on what we do, on what we produce. But Angelou is pointing to something beneath all of that. The emotional residue we leave in other people. The feeling they carry after they have forgotten everything else.
In practical English terms, this quote is used to talk about empathy, about emotional intelligence, about leadership. It's quoted in conversations about teaching, about management, about parenting, any context where the relationship matters as much as the result.
So, how do you recommend people actually use famous quotes when learning English?
Don't try to memorize them in isolation. Learn the context, learn the story. Where was it said? By whom? In what circumstances? Because that story is what makes the words stick. And more than that, it gives you something to talk about. A famous quote with its context is not just a phrase, it's the beginning of a conversation.
And read them aloud. Famous quotes are almost always written to be spoken. The rhythm is in them. The pauses are in them. When you say them out loud, you feel the structure of the English in a way you cannot get from reading silently.
And don't be afraid to use them, even in small ways, even imperfectly. A well-placed quote in a conversation is a sign of cultural fluency that goes well beyond vocabulary. It says, I understand not just the language, but the world this language comes from.
We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Which quote do you find most powerful or most surprising? Share it below. We read every single comment, and we are always so glad to hear which words have stayed with our listeners.
And if this episode helped you today, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who is learning English. It means an enormous amount to us every time someone passes these conversations on.
Thank you so much for being here with us.
Remember, you are not just learning English, you are learning the words that have moved the world.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.